Ladies and gentlemen, the Rapporteur and closing session is about to start. Please take your seats and mute your phones. Please welcome to the stage the chair of this Rapporteur session, Executive Director of the International AIDS Society, Kevin Osborne.
Good evening, everybody. Let's try that again. Good evening, everybody. You're here as diehards because you're here for the final session of AIDS 2019. On behalf of the IAS, I'd really like to welcome you. And I think this session is important for a number of reasons. Because there was so much choice here. I know for me, I couldn't go to all the sessions that I wanted to go to. I couldn't experience everything. So we hope that in the next hour, we are going to take you on a railroad ride of some highlights, of some of the sessions you may have missed. So if there's any questions you have, this is the time to look at it. And I really hope that as you experience the different tracks, you'll be able to go, aha, even though I wasn't at that session, I'll get a flavor of that. So without further ado, we've got 4 really great leads who've done a great job of summing up all the great science, all the great experience that over the last 3 days. And so I'm going to start immediately with track A. I'd really like to welcome Fabio Romero, who is an assistant professor at the Institute of Human Virology at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. So Fabio, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. It is my pleasure tonight to give the closing report for the Track A Basic Science. This is not my presentation. It's not my okay. So first of all, I would like to say that that's not me. That's me. There you go. Thank you. Okay, it will be my pleasure to give the closing report for Track A Basic Science and this presentation, as well as all the session and daily reports that were published online throughout the week are a team effort. And so I definitely want to acknowledge my colleagues, Elizabeth Wanderlich, Angela Wall, and Aurelio Horta-Resendiz for their work and effort throughout the week. So what I'm going to do in the next 12, 13, 14 minutes is to give a few highlights about the entire conference and some of the what we thought were the most interesting talks. And we tried to organize them in themes. And the first theme that I would like to introduce is that of new cellular and anatomical reservoirs of HIV. And the first talk I would like to touch upon was given yesterday by Jonathan Ganner, who gave a very compelling presentation about the role of macrophages as a reservoir for replication-competent HIV. In this study, Jonathan looked at urethral macrophages in HIV-infected individuals, and he found that these cells contained integrated HIV DNA that can be reactivated after LPS stimulation, giving rise to allowing detection of in situ of HIV RNA and HIV proteins. And so certainly this is a clear demonstration that macrophages are indeed a long-term reservoir for HIV. Next, I would like to go again over the role of naive T cells as a reservoir for HIV. And we heard 2 talks that point clearly in that direction. The first one, and they were back-to-back talks yesterday afternoon. The first one was given by Emanuele Venanzi, who showed that although naive CD4 T cells contain a low frequency of integrated HIV, a very high percentage of these integrated proviruses are intact. And right after him, Jory Simons showed that clonal expansion of HIV is more frequent in more differentiated CD4 T cell subsets. And so if you put these two presentations together, it is quite clear that naive T cells are an important reservoir for HIV because they are long-lived, they are transcriptionally silent, and so they are more hidden to the immune system, and also because they can replenish the memory reservoir through differentiation. And the third presentation I would like to touch upon about new reservoirs is also a presentation from a fellow Italian, Paola Sette, who looked at SIV-infected and ART-suppressed pigtail macaques. And she clearly showed that there is an infiltration of SIV-infected CD4 T cells in both pericardial and peritoneal adipose tissue in these animals. And so these three talks show that the concept that memory CD4 T cells and lymphoid tissues are unique reservoirs for HIV is incorrect. There are additional cell types, there are additional tissues and organs, and so this information has to inform how we design cure strategies moving forward. Speaking about cure strategy, I would like to discuss two talks that highlight potentially two new latency reversing agents. The first one is AZD5582, which is a SMAC mimetic. So this is a molecule that is able to activate NF-κB through the non-canonical pathway and leading to a slower but longer lasting effect. And we heard talks from two established scientists at UNC. One of them is my former mentor, David Margolis, who showed that AZD5582 induces a much smaller set of host genes than ingenol in CD4 T cells, and therefore is potentially less toxic. And also, this compound is able to reactivate HIV latency, both in cell line models as well as in CD4 T cells from HIV patients ex vivo. And then we heard a talk from Victor Garcia, also at UNC, as I mentioned, and Victor looked at two different preclinical models of HIV infection. He studied HIV-infected humanized mice, ART-suppressed HIV-infected humanized mice, as well as HIV-infected ART-suppressed monkeys. And he was able to show that AZD5582 is able to reactivate HIV and SIV in these two models. The next novel latency reversing agent is a STING agonist. And we heard about it just a few minutes ago in a talk by Maud Mavinger. So STING is a ER-associated factor that senses nucleic acids, and when you trigger the STING pathway, you lead at activation of transcription factors that are involved in HIV expression, and also T-cell specific immune responses. And so she looked at the effect of a STING agonist in SIV-infected ART-suppressed monkeys, and 2 of 6 of these monkeys showed a robust SIV reactivation after multiple stimulation with the STING agonist, and also activation of SIV-specific CD4 T cell responses. And so these two talks, slides summarize efforts toward development of new latency reversing agents that go beyond the classical HDAC inhibitors and others that we have heard about over the last few years. Yesterday there was a very beautiful presentation in the plenary session by Adam, I forget the last name, I apologize. Yes, I apologize, I forget the last name, but a beautiful presentation about the role that microbiome plays in the immune activation. And there was also an entire session about the microbiome, and one of the presentations was given by Laura Knoll-Romas. And in her study, Laura looked at women who take MPA or Depo-Provera as a contraceptive. And she found that women who have high levels of MPA display also high levels of infection, but only in situations where their vaginal microbiome is lactobacillus dominant. So this doesn't happen when there are high levels of MPA, but the vaginal microbiome is not lactobacillus dominant. So what this means is that the microbiome can alter and can affect the way the organism responds to MPA treatment or MPA assumption, and increasing or not the risk of acquiring SIV. And remaining in terms of HIV infection in women, we've also heard a beautiful talk from John Karn, who looked at the role of estrogen in regulating HIV transcription. And in this study, John showed that estrogen can suppress HIV transcription and HIV reactivation from latency, as well as viral spreading. And this evidence was confirmed by, and this information was confirmed by evidence that, surprisingly, the viral reservoir expands with age in women as they go through reproductive aging. So normally, the viral reservoir either stays stable or slightly declines, but in women who go through reproductive aging and so lose expression of estrogen, the reservoir appears to expand. Moving on to another theme, the role of the relationship between integration sites and proviral sequences. We've heard two very interesting talks. One was by Matthias Lichterfeld, who looked at 3 HIV-infected patients on long-term antiretroviral therapy. And Matthias demonstrated that in these 3 individuals, intact proviruses are found more frequently in non-genic chromosomal regions, and also in regions that are less accessible to transcription factors. And so this points to the fact that intact proviruses may have a feature of a deeper latency. And after that, we also heard a very interesting talk, as always, from Yashi Ho, who showed that in some cases, HIV integration is able to drive transcription and also protein expression of host genes downstream of the providers. And in the case of cancer genes, this may lead to cell proliferation and clonal expansion. And so clearly these two talks together underscore how HIV integration is not an event that has no consequences, but certainly there is an interplay between the host chromosome, the host genes, and the proviral genome. In my opinion, one of the highlights of this entire meeting was this report by Xu Yu, who talked about the San Francisco patient. So this is an individual who was diagnosed back in 1992 and was never under antiretroviral therapy. And there are about 24 years of recorded undetectable viremia for this individual, and over 30 viral tests that are below the limit of detection. And despite extensive testing and sampling of this patient by IPDA that detects intact proviral DNA, and also by QVOA, so far it's been impossible to identify intact DNA sequences and to rescue HIV from the latent reservoir from this patient. And this may be the first example of natural sterilizing cure that we've heard about, or at least that I've heard about. So I have only 2 more slides left, so I think I'm on time. The first one is a presentation today from Lydie Tourban, who showed how HIV-infected individuals who are treated earlier during the acute infection with antiretroviral therapy maintain CD4 T cells that are more functional and then have a higher killing ability. However, these patients at the same time have a much lower frequency of HIV-specific CD8 T cells. And so this underscores how, on one hand, early antiretroviral therapy, again, on one hand, reduces the seeding of the latent reservoir, leading to a smaller reservoir, but on the other hand, doesn't allow full development of proper and immune responses. And so it would be interesting to see whether it's possible to treat early so that we can reduce the establishment of the latent reservoir, but then expand these functional CD8 T cells possibly through therapeutic vaccination. And the last slide, I'm showing it. It's a very interesting new technology that was presented by François Villinger, and it's called immuno-PET CT. So this is a technology that combines immuno-PET, so it's through the use of antibodies against SAV that are conjugated to radionuclides, and in combination with CT. So what we're seeing here are 6 images of the same SIV-infected monkey. And on the left, we see 2 images taken during antiretroviral therapy. And so if you look at the intestinal area, you don't see any green, which shows that there is no viral replication as expected, considering that the animal is under antiretroviral therapy. But following interruption, 3 weeks after interruption, then in the 4 images on the right, you see quite a bit of green in the intestinal area, showing that SAV replication has reemerged. And so this is a beautiful technology because you can see very rapidly and without the need to sample the animal, you can monitor the dynamics of SAV replication. And importantly, this technology is able to detect viral reactivation 1 or 2 weeks prior to viremia rebound. And with that, I will stop. I will thank you all for your attention, and I also would like to take this opportunity to thank also on behalf of my colleagues, Nicolas Chamon and Nancy Archin, for the opportunity to act as rapporteurs and to serve the HIV community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fabio. I'm sure you'll agree that in 15 minutes, he's taken you on a magical journey of what happened in track A. So as we move now to track B, I'd really like to introduce Laura Waters, who is an HIV and hepatitis lead at the Central and Northwest London NHS Foundation Trust's Mortimer Market Street in London. Welcome, Laura, and we look forward to track B.
So good evening, everybody. It's my honour to present the Track B Rapporteur highlights, although we should probably have been Track D for dolutegravir, as you will see. These are my disclosures. My main disclosure is thanks to being in Mexico City's noisiest hotel. I had 2 hours sleep last night, so if I trip over my words, it's not tequila. I'm exhausted. Firstly, I must thank the Team B Track Rapporteurs. They've been absolutely amazing. James McMahon from Australia, Colleen Kelly from the US, and Luis Mosqueda from here in Mexico, who's also been translating the daily summaries into Spanish. They've all been wonderful, particularly today when I've not done much reporting at all. So, although this topic of PrEP overlaps with Track C as a sexual health physician, I wanted to touch on it a little. The rise of STIs preceded the advent of PrEP. And the rise of STIs is not a reason to withhold PrEP. Much of the rise also is due to settings where STI screening was not performed as frequently as it has since PrEP has been available. Now, there was some discussion in one of the sessions about antibiotic prophylaxis. Just a word of caution, please don't treat any STIs with single dose azithromycin, and certainly not for prevention either. And of note, there was an oral poster from a cohort in German MSM which showed that Mycoplasma genitalium was the most frequent STI, more common than chlamydia or gonorrhea, and that may have implications for prevention strategies. Discover, I won't dwell on much, that's a track C topic, but this is the trial that showed TAF-FTC was non-inferior to TDF-FTC for PrEP at CROI earlier this year. We saw an analysis at this meeting which showed expected PK, but my team felt that the efficacy and adverse event assertions were perhaps premature, and really our focus should be on expanding access to affordable PrEP globally. Moving on to cascades of care, this was a huge topic. I'm putting it into a very small slide. A couple of points to make are that differences in definitions can make it very challenging to compare cascades. So, for example, choice of denominators. I think we all recognize that broad cascades may mask inequities in different populations, and focused subpopulation cascades are essential to identify barriers for underserved populations, including trans people and indigenous people. I think a great quote on Monday was, why are we asking relatively well people to attend clinics? Only clinicians think that's fun. And when we think about engagement and retention, we must be delivering care in a way that our patients would choose. Preconception dolutegravir exposure and neural tube defects has been a huge focus over the last 15 months or so, and the very eagerly anticipated and now published updated results of the Botswana cohort with more than 1,200 additional dolutegravir exposures since the initial analysis have shown an attenuation of the impact from 0.94 to 0.3 prevalence of NTDs. If we look at the prevalence difference on the bottom line of the table, we see that there is a statistically significant, though very small, prevalence difference compared to the other groups, including women on efavirenz at conception and HIV-negative women. The key thing is this cohort will probably never truly refute the association if it's not real. We also saw data from a Brazil cohort with no NTDs in almost 400 pregnancies, and an update from the antiretroviral pregnancy registry. Really, the number of integrase exposures, particularly dolutegravir, are too small to draw meaningful conclusions. The 0.4% dolutegravir signal is driven by one single event, so please do upload your exposure cases to the website. What really wasn't discussed early enough in the reaction to the initial signal were the disadvantages of alternatives to dolutegravir, the association between protease inhibitors and preterm delivery, and models showing that there will be more virologic failure and more transmission to sexual partners and to infants if women were on efavirenz as compared to dolutegravir. There was lots of work trying to find a mechanism, some folate receptor antagonism studies, which really showed no consistent effect, and any findings were associated with very high dolutegravir concentrations. Animal studies also inconclusive. There was one zebrafish study. I've put it in more because I like zebrafish than anything else, but what it did show is that dolutegravir toxicity could be reversed by folate. Community engagement, of course, is absolutely crucial, and the fact there was little or no community engagement at the very start was something we must learn important lessons from, and informed choice must remain at the centre of everything we do. Of course, the WHO have updated their guidelines, and as we heard, and dolutegravir is now the preferred option for all adolescents and adults first line, including women of childbearing age. One other issue that emerged in the early response was some countries wanted to limit access to dolutegravir to women with effective contraception. Of course, that requires access to effective contraception. Contraception leads me on to ECHO. ECHO also has been published. This was a large randomized controlled trial looking at two different long-acting hormonal methods of contraception and comparing them to a non-hormonal intrauterine device. It was undertaken due to a cohort signal suggesting that the long-acting hormonal methods may be associated with a higher risk of HIV acquisition in HIV-negative women, but this RCT did not show a difference in HIV risk. What we saw at this conference was pregnancy incidence. This is looking at typical rather than perfect use, and what you see is all three methods are highly effective. However, in the adjusted hazard ratio analysis, there was a trend to the injectable being better than the IUD, a trend for the implant being better than the injectable, but significantly, the implant was better than the IUD. So if the implant is the most effective method, we must remember this cannot be given if women are on efavirenz. You see significant reductions in progesterone exposure that aren't addressed by inserting 2 implants, as we saw at CROI. Keeping on the topic of efavirenz, this is Reflate TB2. This was a trial undertaken based on promising phase 2 and PK data, looking at TDF3-TC backbone with either raltegravir 400 twice daily or efavirenz 600 once daily in people on standard TB treatment. What it showed was at week 48, 66% of people on efavirenz compared to 61% on raltegravir had an undetectable viral load, and you can see from the middle bars that was driven by virologic non-response. Of note, 1 in 3 people had a CD4 below 40 and 3/4 had a viral load above 100,000. If we look at the forest plot, raltegravir failed to show non-inferiority, so efavirenz 600 clearly remains the preferred option in this setting. Lessons are, I think we've learned many times before, that phase 2 results may not translate into phase 3, but importantly here, highlighting that differences may emerge after week 24, because at the week 24 time point, both arms performed similarly. Now moving on to dolutegravir, I'm going to focus on efficacy and weight, but I want to highlight a PK sub-analysis of the Odyssey study looking at dolutegravir PK in children between 6 and 20 kilograms in weight, and that's going to inform imminent submissions to the FDA and EMA. Now, Gemini showed us last year that at week 48, dolutegravir and lamivudine dual therapy first line was non-inferior to triple therapy with TDF-FTC dolutegravir, and reassuringly, that's been maintained out to week 96 with the dual regimen remaining non-inferior. Importantly, there was no emergent resistance. What Gemini doesn't tell us is about the efficacy of this option in switch, but thankfully Tango, also presented today, did, and in Tango, people suppressed on a regimen of TAF, FTC, and a third agent, mainly elvitegravir cobicistat in 2/3 of participants. They were randomized to stay on their TAF-based regimen or switch to dolutegravir lamivudine dual therapy. What we see here is almost identical and very low rates of viral failure, almost identical and very high rates of viral suppression. And again, the forest plots show no significant difference. Dolutegravir lamivudine is non-inferior in this setting. Again, no emergent resistance. However, these studies were justifiably criticized for the predominantly male participant inclusion. That certainly wasn't true of Advance. This, again, is a study that was published today in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this first-line trial in South Africa randomized more than 1,000 people to TAF-FTC dolutegravir, TDF-FTC dolutegravir, or TDF-FTC efavirenz. As I mentioned, 60% were female, almost all participants were black, and the author stated that the participants were drawn from a group that is representative of almost 1/4 of the global epidemic. Here are the results. In terms of viral suppression at week 48, there is little difference between the arms. It's not statistically significant and is high in all groups. It was actually age and employment that were more predictive of response than the antiretroviral regimens selected, and young unemployed people experiencing much lower rates of viral suppression than their older employed counterparts. The OT analysis showed 95 to 96% suppression in all arms, which is astonishing considering there was no baseline resistance testing, and pre-NNRTI resistance approaches 15% in this region. Moving on to weight gain, this is a slide from Michelle Morehouse's presentation, looking at some of the factors that have been associated with weight gain on ART over the last year or so. Dolutegravir and bictegravir, a lesser degree protease inhibitors. Most at risk appear to be women and black individuals, and there may be a protective effect of TDF. Michelle presented data from NAMSAL, which was a study comparing TDF3-TC with dolutegravir or efavirenz 400 first line, and there was significantly more weight and BMI gain and significantly more emergent obesity in the dolutegravir recipients. In the Advance study at week 96, where the baseline BMI was higher in women than in NAMSAL, you can see numerically greater weight increases in men and women on TAF dolutegravir compared to TDF dolutegravir, and the lowest weight gain on the efavirenz regimen. What you also see, though, is numerically more weight gain on women, and if you looked at the time course, weight gain seemed to plateau after week 48 in men, but continue to rise up to week 96 in women. The DEXA scans showed that men experienced similar fat and lean mass gain, whereas in women it was more fat than lean, and whether this has consequences for any clinical implications we need to see. I think most telling, though, was this heat graph from that study. If we look at the far left, TAF, FTC, dolutegravir, red is obese, yellow overweight, and green is normal. You can see from yourselves the dramatic impact of this regimen on weight in women. To finish on new drugs, fostemsavir, in the BRIGHT study, we saw 96-week results with really excellent viral suppression in highly treatment-experienced people. There was data on islatravir, or the new name for MK8591, which is a first-in-class nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor. And in a phase 2 study, individuals who were suppressed on doravirine 3-TC and islatravir triple therapy then dropped the lamivudine and continued, and it's looking promising as a 2-drug regimen, islatravir and doravirine. There was some data on the GS6207 capsid inhibitor. Phase 1 subcutaneous single dose showed a 2.2 viral load log reduction at day 14, which is really impressive. Ooh. And finally, to touch on no drugs, there's been a lot of discussion about cure, and there was one session with lots of abstracts focused on analytical treatment interruption, i.e. where people with HIV stop their antiretrovirals to see if the cure has been successful. There was much discussion about potential implication for participants and their sexual partners, and the key message was to engage the community early and continuously in trial design and conduct. And perhaps had the community been engaged much sooner after the dolutegravir NTD signal emerged, the consequence response may have been less fragmented and less confusing. Finally, to finish on access, I'm going to quote my dear friend and colleague, Professor Chloe Orkin, who in her excellent session on injectables and implants said the future is here, but it's our collective responsibility to deliver innovation everywhere to everyone, including women and children. How can we achieve that? In the same session, we heard from Charles Gore from the Medicines Patent Pool, who successfully rolled out generic TLD to 2.7 million people by December 2018 in 26 countries, and that is now well in excess of 3 million individuals. And they're proposing to establish a long-acting technology access hub, so hopefully these very innovative treatment options can be rolled out globally sooner. So to finish by thanking some of my London colleagues and friends for all of their support, I want to thank the TrackB team who put together an absolutely excellent selection of data. Of course, Brenda and Anton, our local host and IAS president, for such an inclusive conference. And as I said at the start, the fact that such a high proportion of presenters have been female and young is laudable. Lorraine Ruti is an absolute star from the International AIDS Society. I've now christened her Saint Lorraine. Her endless patience and kindness means I want her to run for Prime Minister, because the one we've just earned is not very likable. I want to thank everyone here. I think the atmosphere has been absolutely amazing. I've been run ragged, but the energy at this conference has been absolutely inspiring, and my husband's never going to forgive me for this next one. I want to wish you all safe travels home. I'm looking forward to getting into my own bed with my dear husband and my cat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura and team, thank you for that wonderful presentation and for the visuals that you gave us in our safe travels home. As we now walk to track C, it's a great pleasure to introduce Omar Swed. He's the Research Director in Fundación USPED in Buenos Aires and was recently elected President of the Argentinian Infectious Diseases Society for the period 2019 to 2021. Omar, for the next 15 minutes, the stage is yours for track C. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have a stall. I've never been so well received here with this stall, you know. I'm happy for that. Thank you very much. Thank you in particular to the organizer of the conference, to Beatriz and Cine, that proposed my name for coordinating this session. And in particular to my team, Ana Garcia Ferreira from Brazil, Nicolas Naidu from South Africa, and Antonio Camiro from Mexico, that we work hard to be in the deadline for collecting all the information. Thank you. So last year, the track C was closed by Dr. Radis calling for more information and data about transgender women And this year, for first time, a plenary in the IIS was fully dedicated to transgender women, in particular to the continuum of care in PrEP. But also there were other sessions, 80/80 poster and presentation about transgender women, showing the difficulties that these people is experiencing in the every day in her life, and all this is aggravated by the stigma. In the Preparadas study in Brazil, they measure the number of syndemic is 50% of the population have 2 or more than this condition. And this also impacted in the access to PrEP, with less than 2% of people in the national PrEP program. But also there were good news, ideas, solutions, like the importance of integrating gender affirmative therapies in the clinical care. This is good, it's not enough. We need more structural intervention to improve the life on the syndemics. Also, we see the Tangerine Clinic showing the competent service delivered by transgender people improve access and reduce the stigma. The importance of the involvement of the government, but still, there are many countries that doesn't recognize the gender identity. And finally, the domiciliary testing, integrated testing for HIV, syphilis, many other diseases, and even the treatment at home can be very successful and acceptable for this population. We also heard some opinions about why some transgender researchers were not presenting, and probably it was for a language barrier, but anyway. Jerome Galea presented data about this study, more than almost 200 people, 42% depression. Fortunately, it was mild and moderated, so it can be treated easily. We have also data from a very long online survey showing 13% of use of chemsex among MSM in Latin America. And among the MSM that are HIV positive, there was a big inequity in age, education, and income regarding viral suppression. In the plenary, in the second plenary, Cáceres showed the increasing number of HIV among youth people, but this is also seen in other countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. And in Africa, HPTN 082 and POWER show that the PrEP uptake is highly acceptable in this region. Sexual and reproductive health showed that it is important to combine PrEP offer with contraceptive services and family planning. And as Laura showed earlier, the ECHO trial showed higher HIV incidence, but also high acceptability to preventive intervention. The EPIC trial is a PrEP-wide state project in Australia. And in this study, regarding individuals that stopped and restarted during the follow-up, they can see that the periods when the individual stopped were periods where the sexual behavior decreased or the risk was decreasing. So this has implication for the definition of retention and discontinuation. But the important issue about the EPIC study is the 44% reduction of the incidence. This has big implications from the public health point of view. Also, in the Prevenir study in France, we see follow-up results. And this big cohort, 3,000 individuals, 50% of them receiving on-demand PrEP, and this data was critical for the WHO approval of the on-demand PrEP regimen. Self-testing, obviously, increased the access, increased the possibility to detect individuals, but also the rapid distribution and high volume of the distribution is acceptable for MSM and female sex workers in Africa and improved the 90-90-90. But when the distribution is through peers that I specifically hired for to convince the people to perform the HIV cell testing, they can be some grade of coercion, so we need to be aware of that. We cannot be out of the digital change, and the HIV cell test tag reached 3.5 million tweets. So we need to use this methodology to increase demand, demand of the participant, demand creation, sorry. And we see in the Tangerine clinic, 70%, 75% of the transgender women contacted the clinic through Facebook. So we need to use these resources. Regarding new tools for the public health impact, we have two new tools, HIV trace and the residency testing. The HIV trace is using the Sanger sequence. We can do molecular epidemiology. And Dr. Avila showed how in Mexico, the HIV epidemic concentrate in young people, young MSM, and in particular in the center of big cities. Also in the UK, Dennis showed that the acute HIV infection is usually clustered, and the cluster continue along the time. So this confirmed the importance that the detection of the acute HIV infection has, and we can remember the plenary that we heard today. In the IMPREP study, 0.3% of the patients starting PrEP in the same day had acute HIV infection. So it is important to implement rapid tests, point of care, for molecular diagnosis of acute HIV infection. This molecular study can be useful also to define the situation of this very rare patient that present with ambiguous tests receiving PrEP. In this very teaching conference presented by Dr. Molina, you have three scenarios, and you need to confirm the presence or the absence of HIV infection, and you need to decide if continue the PrEP, stop it, or initiate antiretroviral therapy, and for this you will need to call a specialist. But please try not to call at night. The risk of resistance is low in PrEP, with the exception of area with a high prevalence of 65R mutation, and sorry for the typo. The IMPREP study is the largest same-day PrEP study, and it is being developed here in Latin America, led by Brazil, including Peru and Mexico. The baseline data show very high prevalence of STI at the screening, and very big difference in the population between Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. But also demonstrated that the intervention is safe and is feasible. And we are worried about the low retention, in particular in Peru and in a specific group like transgender women and adolescents. This new, very exciting news about this 85911 is latravir. It's never easy to put name. Somebody need to do a name more easy. It's an inhibitor of the translation and has been co-formulated in an implant similar to Nexplanon, and it was tested in 16 individuals, healthy individuals, and 2 different doses, and the largest dose achieved concentration, the high concentration during at least 1 year. So it is a promising product for biomedical prevention in long-acting. We don't know yet what will be the strategy if you use it alone or combine it. A post-hoc analysis of DISCOVER was presented. There were no difference between arms in HIV risk, STI, or adherence. We see here higher levels of TAF in PVMC compared with tenofovir. And the analysis, the PK analysis showed that this level increased more quickly, but really the clinical and biologic implications of this need to be better addressed with more research. Everybody is waiting for a vaccine since David Hu say that we will have it. So here we saw the results of the ASCENT trial, a phase 2 trial to identify which vaccine we will use in phase 3 trial. And actually they decided to include both of the vaccines because it is better immunogenicity and a global coverage. And this will be the two vaccines that will be combined in the Mosaico study that will be started soon here in Latin America, in several countries in Latin America. Lastly, please take a look to those posters that all these friends send by Twitter or WhatsApp in order to be sure that we will not miss anything. We have the impact that the financial incentive can represent in the reduction of HIV incidence among girls in Africa. We see that dapivirine was well accepted in the HOPE study and also with low HIV incidence. The HPTN 07A, in which a very marginalized patients were randomized to receive standard of care or case management, show no difference between the arms, so we need to look for more intervention to address the syndemics of these highly vulneralized people. The conception service, when including the male, could increase the 90-90-90 in Africa. Landowitz presented the high use of polysubstance among MSM, but this doesn't impact in the PrEP adherence. It is important that in this paper, the pain navigator could reach very easily in cost-effective way female sex workers to testing. And two interesting preclinical studies showing the potential use of raltegravir plus 3TC for PrEP and the potential use of one single dose of TAF FTC raltegravir after the exposure as in an on-demand PEP. So the take-home message are we need to expand self-test, PrEP, same-day, antiretroviral, and TAS for making public health impact. We need to enhance participation and representation of transgender women. We need to increase the focus on youth, MSM, and other key populations we can identify in our countries, and overcome stigma and syndemics. And we can use new technologies for improved HIV programming. And please stay tuned for implants and long-term PrEP options. But I also heard here that we need to try to make prevention sexy. So thank you very much and do it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Omar and team, thank you very much. That was track C. And our final track before we pass on to the closing ceremony, I'd really like to introduce Sergio Bautista Arredondo. He's the director of the Division of Health Economics and Health System Innovations at the National Institute of Public Health here in Mexico. So welcome, Sergio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by acknowledging all the help I received during these past 3 days from a great team, mostly from Mexico. As you can see, very heavy Mexican team, heavily Mexican. I want to start with some background on this presentation. First, this is the first year that TRACK-D is not only about implementation science, but also about social and behavioral science. And this is welcome because implementation science is very complex and social and behavioral sciences can help a lot. It also makes the rapporteuring more complex, but that's okay. Another important point of background, because implementation science is relevant at the end of the pipeline of delivering services, a very important aspect of what we've been looking in the past 3 days in this track has to do with the progress towards the 90-90-90 targets. So that was very important. I also wanted to tell you, as a matter of background, what we, the team in this track, were looking for in the presentations that and the sessions we were joining. First thing, we were looking for evidence on and innovations in implementation strategies, scale-up strategies, scaling up successful interventions. We heard a lot about PrEP in this topic. We were also looking for reaching implementation of programs, reaching key populations, linking them to HIV services, and keeping those already engaged. We were also looking for impact evaluations of programs and policies. On the other hand, we were also looking for challenges, barriers for acceptability, access, retention at different levels, structural, local, and individual levels. Finally, we were very interested in looking for aspects related to financing and efficiency of program implementation. So those are the topics we were looking for. What did we find? I want to give you an overview of the themes that we found in these past 3 days in the track D. First, one very important message that we saw and we heard over different sessions was the importance of accurate, timely data as the core of good programming design, implementation, and evolution of programs. This is very important for implementation science because programs need to evolve based on the reality of the implementation. Second message or theme, involvement of the community is critical for programmatic success. We heard a lot of examples on this. This is also very, very important, and we're having more and more evidence on this. But not only involving the community in the implementation of the programs, but we also heard a lot about involving the community all along, from the design of the programs, being a key part of the design, and even we heard very interesting discussions on involving the community in generating evidence and involving them in research. Another important topic, we witnessed a few really nice examples of culturally mindful interventions. This is where the basic science and the efficacy trials becomes really complex, adapting to the specific context in where the services are delivered. And we saw examples of very culturally mindful interventions that address structural, complex barriers and problems. Stigma and the link between stigma and decisions was key. We heard a lot about stigma in these sessions. Finally, and this is more and more at the end of social sciences, we saw examples of how context matters. This is very, very important. Laws matter, and other aspects of the context where programs are delivered are very important in alleviating or exacerbating vulnerability and risk. Those are the main themes, the main topics, and I wanted to show a few examples of each one of them. In terms of the importance of the data, we heard from Ambassador Birks in the context of the DREAMS program, which is a really nice program for young female and adolescent women in Africa, how they use data to identify key gaps in reaching specific populations, and how this information is key in shaping the design of the programs. In the DREAMS core package, girls and young women are at the center, and with the objectives of reducing risk, mobilizing communities, and strengthening families, data is used all along to inform the design of the programs. Even though there is a core package, there are differences across countries and across populations. Also, in the context of the DREAMS program, we heard really nice examples of how data is used to evolve programs. Not only evaluate the impact and the success of the programs, but also how the programs can be redesigned. For example, they look at the variation in HIV detection at the district level in all these countries. They found success stories and other not so successful in different places, and they use this heterogeneity to redefine the programs. We also heard from from Navindra Prasad about the linkages program, another very successful, complex, comprehensive HIV program implemented in almost 40 countries, and how they use data all along the process, from understanding the population and the situation and the problems they are addressing, to planning and implementation of the response and the monitoring and evaluation of the programs. Another interesting example that we saw, and this is the only financing evaluation that we saw in this conference, an impact evaluation on development assistance in 74 recipient countries between 2000 and 2015, where they found that development assistance crowded in domestic private health investment. This is very important, and also translated into reductions of incidence of TB, prevalence of HIV, and mortality. The second message, involving the community, critical for programmatic success. We heard that this really nice example in Australia, where HIV programs focused on easy access, peer-based health promotion, and community mobilization, leading to 92, 97, and 95 result. This is linked to involving the communities in program implementation. Another really nice example from the US, among Black and Latin MSM, they leverage the existing social networks, and they increase knowledge, communication skills about PrEP use, and reduce PrEP stigma. They also found interesting results and promising results in terms of feasibility, with really high retention at 12 weeks, and also in terms of acceptability of this approach. Community involvement all along, not only in the implementation, but also in other phases of the process. We heard from Miriam Hartman how community engagement is being taken more seriously in clinical trials, and we saw interesting examples. We have good participatory practices, and pharmaceutical companies are starting using them. That's encouraging. We also heard from the iPrevent study in Cape Town, where they engage end users in the research process before the products reach the market. And also from the AMP studies experience, where early and ongoing community engagement in HIV prevention efficacy trials is proving successful, feasible, and it's being increased. Culturally mindful interventions. This is really important for implementation, and also is very, very complex. We saw a few examples of how this can be done. Really nice example in Mozambique, the Sawa Sawa intervention, when they used mass media combined with community dialogue, positive prevention groups aiming at reducing stigma. I can say this in 10 seconds, but this was a lot of work, a lot of being present in the community, listening, and sometimes changing the minds of the researchers and implementing a successful program. They found a reduction at the community level of stigma among all participants, and this was linked to increasing HIV testing among men. I think this is a really nice example of how a relatively simple intervention, testing, which is sometimes a great challenge, it takes a lot of work in the implementation phase to be successful. Another example of multi-level interventions, the effect of consistent access to school feeding, among other components, linked to the delay of risk sexual behaviors in South Africa, particularly among men, and it was consistent access to these services that made the difference. Laws and context, this is very important, and we're growing in complexity of how can we address these issues. But we saw an example of how important this is. Carrie Lyons showed using individual level data to characterize the relationship between HIV infection and the legal context of sex work across 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And she showed how female sex workers face significantly greater odds of HIV linked to different types of stigma, and this was exacerbated by criminalized context. Another example of how context is important in this study in the US, where they found that alcohol and drug consumption while alcohol and drug consumption is higher among white men, HIV prevalence is a lot higher among African Americans. So there are no link between those two behaviors. There is a link, however, between HIV and the network, the density and the homophily. So very close sexual and social networks are linked to higher risk for HIV. Stigma was very important, as I mentioned before, and has a great impact to access along the cascade of HIV services. In this study in Kenya, they identified types of stigma. This is a really interesting approach, linked or coming from different sources and expressed in different ways. And just to give you an example, the product stigma is very important for access and retention to PrEP, where users have to keep the secret the pills for PrEP because the bottle is very similar to ARVs. And someone who doesn't know about PrEP could think they have HIV. And that's how, I think, a very relevant example of thinking better how we implement technologies and programs is very important, and in understanding this. More about stigma and retention. In Australia, 25% discontinuation in PrEP linked to being trans or gender diverse, injecting drug use or methamphetamine use. These are important factors linked to both stigma and less access to services. The same in Brazil, 13% PrEP discontinuation linked to being sex worker or homeless. Not everything was bad news. We also heard this morning that from Carrie Lyons using implementation, literature search, using implementation research to assess stigma. This is very complex to assess, but they found, even though most of the examples were pilot or once-off implementations, implemented at the very different levels, they found promising results, and their recommendations are that implementation science could support the dissemination of stigma reduction interventions. I want to end by emphasizing the themes we heard today in the past 3 days in the implementation science track. Accurate and timely data is the core of good programming. Involvement of the community is critical for programmatic success. Culturally mindful interventions, although are very difficult to implement, are very important to address complex problems. Stigma is very important, and it's related to decisions. And this is something we have to consider. And the context is also very important and is linked to increased or reduction in vulnerability and risk. We also heard that social and behavioral science is underfunded. And I hope you agree with me that we saw in these 3 days really great examples that this should change, and we should increase funding for this type of research. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President of the International AIDS Society, Dr. Anton Pozniak, and the local chair, Dr. Brenda Crabtree Ramirez.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a great few days, and I just wanted to say thank you to a few people. And the first person I wanted to thank actually is Brenda Crabtree Ramirez, who has been an inspiration to me and to all who have met her. And all I can say is that this conference wouldn't be the same without her. So, Brenda, would you like to say a few words?
Well, so I want to acknowledge, of course, and first of all, my fantastic co-chair for his knowledge, his wisdom, and his good humor. And it has been a privilege and an honor to work with you. I want to thank the IIS team. You have really made this journey very special to me. Thank you. And all the delegates, thank you for coming here to Mexico. I hope you have had a wonderful time here in this chaotic, crazy city. My special thanks to all the young people involved in the conference, and also to the advocates, community, patients. I'm convinced together we are more. And thanks to my mentor, Juan Sierra and Carlos del Rio, and also to my brilliant mentees, many of them are here. And finally, to my daughters and all the women in science here at this room and outside this room, you have been my inspiration the whole year, and I thank you for all this inspiration. And to the people that privilege the equity in science and leadership, thank you so much. My deeply thanks to all of you, and see you in the next conference, and hasta pronto, amigos.
So you'll say, thankfully, it's the last you'll see of me now. I just have to give a couple of thanks, which is to the IS and the staff and the Governing Council and its leadership, and especially to Kevin Osborne, who has been leading us through this last year. Kevin. I'd like to say thank you to the volunteers, one of which is very close to me, but they have been absolutely fantastic. They give up their time, they volunteer to come here, and you're great guys, absolutely great. They're amazing. And then to just everybody who sent in abstracts and speakers in the audience. So before we pave our way to the next science conference in Berlin, we do need just to hear from youth. And it's a real great pleasure that I'm going to introduce Jacqueline Alessi, who's Vice Chair of the Board of the Global Network of People Living with HIV. She served as an Executive Director of the Uganda Network of Young People Living with HIV and AIDS. Now, you may not know, but Jacqueline conceptualized and organized the first Y+ beauty pageant in Uganda for young people living with HIV, and it was aimed at reducing stigma, and it attracted more than 10,000 people. So that's a great achievement, Jacqueline. So please come to the stage, and we'd love to hear from you.
Greetings, everyone. You've already heard my name. My name is Jacqueline Alessi, and I'm from Uganda. I'm a young mother, openly living with HIV, and I've been on treatment for the last 13 years. For several years, I've been on treatment. I was on the first-line treatment, which was not effective on me, and I was switched to second line. This is a situation that many people around the globe experience every day. We need to ensure that science we have seen during the past 3 days transforms into accessible quality medication for persons with HIV. We need to ensure that science saves life for everyone and not for the rich. For everyone. People in upper, middle, and lower income countries, gay men, transgender people, indigenous populations, people who use drugs, sex workers, youths, women, girls, adolescents, and children. No one should be left behind. As new scientific evidence is available, we need to ensure that everyone can enjoy the benefits. The new WHO guidelines recommend dolutegravir as first-line choice. Unfortunately, it's not accessible for all. We need to remove patent barriers to make life-saving medication available for all. We still see the same challenges over and over. The lack of political will from our governments has caused stockouts, stigma and discrimination at health care services, the deprioritization of HIV and ignoring key populations. This lack of political will is killing us. Progress has been made in different prevention methods like PrEP, U equals to U, and others. We've seen the good news from different studies of a possible vaccine or even a cure, which we say we can't wait to have this because those of us having HIV need solutions that will help keep our hope high. U equals to U is perhaps the most inspiring recent campaign and reality in the HIV history. It brings hope to so many of us, but most importantly, it brings the message that we are not disease vectors. Listen to this and let it sink in. We are not disease vectors. We are human beings. While some advance is made in parts of the world, in others, the violation of human rights, particularly to key population, is getting worse. The killing of transgender women should stop. Hate crimes, criminalization of love must stop. We must move to recognition that sex work is work. Funding for HIV is reducing. We don't know why, but we believe something needs to be done as soon as possible. We have targets that have been set by 2030, and still we have a long way to say there is no funding. We don't want to lose the battle of seeing an AIDS-free generation just because there is no funding. We must ensure that we must ensure to have a fully funded global fund and urge donor countries to keep their commitments to increase their contribution to the global fund for a successful re-impeachment. The HIV epidemic is far from over. We are seeing new infections yearly and totaling avoidable deaths as a result of not investing in people. In recognition to that the HIV epidemic is not over, we need to ensure that institutions like UNAIDS continue to gear and transform the response. Now, to the candidates of UNAIDS Executive Director, I say, eradicate all forms of violence, clean the patriarchy stain, and move forward with dedication, commitment, and renewed energy. Listen to communities. We are the experts. I'm not here to make you feel good. I hope that I've been able to open your eyes and realize that HIV epidemic is not over. I hope that you have realized that science cannot only be for the rich, and the treatment is for all. As I conclude, science has brought us options in prevention, treatment, and care. But stigma, pharma greed, and lack of political will is preventing us from accessing the new science. I want to thank all the activists and the advocates around the world who have tirelessly pushed the limits over and over again in the HIV response. It is because of us, the community, that our HIV response is where it is now. But it's not time to rest. There is still much more to do. We need a stigma-free and AIDS-free world. Better treatment. We need the cure now. Gracias, obrigado, merci beaucoup, dake, thank you very much.
Well, since I said hasta pronto, I'm here again. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my next me. He is an outstanding researcher. He's professor and chair of the Institute of HIV Research at the University of Duisburg in Germany. and he is previously Chief of Cellular Immunology Section at the U.S. Military HIV Research Program, as well as Assistant Professor as it uses. So thank you, Hendrik Streck. I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you, Brenda. These are really hard footsteps to fill. They are not only, was an amazing conference, but also like very amazingly organized and fantastic science here. Well, colleagues, friends, on behalf of the International AIDS Society and the German Minister of Health, Mr. Jens Spahn, it is my great privilege to invite you to the next IAS Science Conference 2021 in Berlin. I would also like to extend this invitation on behalf of all German researchers, clinicians, and activists who are equally thrilled that Germany will host the next IAS 2021 conference. Last but not least, a very warm welcome on behalf of the city of Berlin and its wonderful people. In 1989, the German people peacefully broke through the Berlin Wall, and Germany was reunited after decades of division and separation. Just 4 years after, Berlin was the host of the World AIDS Conference in 1993. While Berlin was celebrating its newly won freedom, there was a sense of despair in the HIV and AIDS community. It became evident that AZT monotherapy only gave a short break in the ravaging, deadly course of the AIDS epidemic. Since then, this narrative has dramatically changed. The life expectancy of a person living with HIV and that is successfully treated is nearly the same, if not the same, like a person who is not infected with HIV. Undetectable means untransmissible. A person that is effectively treated against HIV cannot pass it on. With PrEP, we have a new prevention method in our toolbox to reduce new infections globally, and I'm confident that this is only the beginning of a string of breakthroughs to come in the near future. This change could not have been achieved by one country or one group of scientists alone after this conference in 1993. It is a global effort of all of you. You clinicians, researchers, activists that have not given up after the World Conference in Berlin and have continued the fight. Today, Berlin is like no other city in the world, a city of hope, a city of diversity and a city of freedom, including sexual freedom. Berlin fought hard to achieve this. And so are we. All of us to put an end to stigma and discrimination around the globe, once and for all. And ending the AIDS epidemic requires that no one is left behind. As Berlin was once divided, HIV is still dividing societies. But we can bring down this wall, piece by piece and brick by brick. Thus, Berlin represents hope that a free and open society is possible, and exactly that is the very reason why I think Berlin is the best place to hold the next IAS conference. Also scientifically, Berlin represents hope in the fight against HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. It was in Berlin that Robert Koch discovered tuberculosis, and it was in Berlin that the very first patient was ever cured of HIV, the Berlin patient Timothy Ray Brown. 2021 marks the sad 40th anniversary of the first reports of gay young men dying of unknown diseases, a symptom complex that later became known as AIDS. My hope is that in Berlin, 40 years later, will mark the first day of ending AIDS, and that Berlin will be associated with another breakthrough in our fight against AIDS. As we close the IAS 2019 conference in this wonderful city of Mexico City, we are anxiously awaiting so many results of ongoing trials. In 2021, we will learn about prevention trials, such as injectables, implantables. We will learn about HIV vaccine efficacy trials. At IAS 2021, we want to come together once more to present and discuss new findings on HIV prevention, cure, and novel and exciting antiviral treatment strategies. new insight into HIV's reservoir, HIV immunity, HIV control. And we want to discuss and evaluate and take a very hard look what our progress actually is on ending AIDS. The Berlin patient was followed by the London patient. And the potential third case, the Düsseldorf patient. Step by step, piece by piece, we are moving forward to crack the code how they achieved long-term remission. Friends, colleagues, I'm excited to be here among you today, and I'm very much looking forward to saying to you in just 2 years, herzlich willkommen to Berlin, herzlich willkommen zur IAS 2021. And now I would like to introduce our acting ambassador to Germany, who will also say a few words to you. Mirko Schilbach.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you as probably the last speaker tonight after a few days of hard work at this conference. My name is Mirko Schilbach. I'm the Chargé d'Affaires at the German Embassy here in Mexico. It's my pleasure to invite you as well to Berlin. I am from Berlin. It's my hometown, so I guess I know what I'm talking about. On behalf then of my federal government, and in particular of our Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, I wish to extend our cordial invitation to Berlin to attend the 11th IAS conference on HIV science in 2021. 28 years after the last International AIDS conference took place in our capital in 1993, we will be proud hosts to you all and welcome you with open arms, hearts, and minds to this event, to your event in Germany. We are indeed proud to be chosen as the venue for the world's largest HIV science conference with an expected 6,000 scientists and researchers who come together from all over the world to discuss the latest advances in HIV researches. Germany is a long-standing and reliable ally in the fight against HIV. With a 2.8 billion euro contribution until now, Germany has been one of the top 5 donors to the global fund to fight HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. Moreover, over the past few years, Germany has assumed a strong leadership role in global health. To further strengthen this commitment, a new German strategy on global health has been developed with a particular objective to pursue the Agenda 2030's goal to ensure healthy lives and to promote well-being for all at all ages. This, of course, includes access to the latest and best HIV treatment options for everyone worldwide. In Berlin, a vibrant scientific HIV research community will be welcoming you. Here, the Federal Ministry of Education and Research has brought together scientists working under the umbrella of the German Center for Infectious Diseases. The center focuses on HIV remission and cure, but is also involved in HIV vaccine research, novel treatment options, and development of broadly neutralizing antibodies. The German capital is thus a good choice to host your event. Berlin was the first city in Germany and one of the first in Europe to provide medical care for people living with HIV and AIDS via a deep network of community organizations and clinics. All in all, the cause of your admirable work is very much reflected in Berlin's scientific and civic life. The public there is taking serious interest in your work. And with Professor Dr. Hendrik Streeck, we have an eminent German HIV vaccine researcher as a 2021 conference chair. We are grateful to the IAS for choosing Berlin as the host city of the IAS 2021, and again, the German federal government and I personally warmly welcome you to Berlin next summer. No, the summer after next, actually. Here, well, still awake, here is a short, inspiring, hopefully inspiring video for you. Have a look at what to expect in Berlin. Thank you very much.
It's time to finally end the AIDS epidemic.
Together, we can increase our pace and energy to not halt the fight against HIV and AIDS a few steps short of the finishing line.
The world has the tools required to end the AIDS epidemic as a public health threat by 2030. We call therefore on governments and societies for political and financial commitment to reach this goal.
Collaborative efforts are underway to work on novel HIV prevention and cure strategies, as well as latest HIV treatment options.
The IAS must also be the platform to recall governments' commitment to eliminate stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV.
As Berlin was once divided, HIV is dividing societies, leaving those infected behind. In Berlin, we want to change this narrative once and for all. A world free of AIDS and a world free of stigma. Welcome to Berlin.
Welcome to IAS 2021.
The conference organisers would like to thank all the speakers and co-chairs for their participation. The closing session is now over. The conference organisers would also like to thank all delegates for their attendance. We wish you all an excellent evening. As you leave the room, please remember to return your handsets at the door or give them to one of our volunteers. Thank you for your cooperation.